It says in Kohelet Rabbah, in the Midrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu boneh olamot u'machriban. It's a very famous statement. It appears in other places too, that God, before he created this world, would create and destroy other worlds. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan was quoting from a bunch of different sources. It appears in many ancient books, some of the most ancient mystical texts that talk about this idea of cosmic Shemittot. So if you remember a Shemitah is the sabbatical. So every 7 years you have a Sabbath, right? We have a Sabbath every seventh day, Shabbat, and then every seventh year, God commanded that everybody should just rest for a whole year, at least rest from farming, from agricultural labor. So we rest every 7 days, and then we rest every 7 years. So it's called a Shemitah. And in ancient mystical texts, it talks about how the whole universe goes through cosmic Shemittot, that the whole universe goes through cycles of 7,000 years, that we have 6,000 years of like civilization, and the 7,000th year is a Shemitah, like a rest. And then it starts again, so that humanity goes through cycles of Shemittot. Every so often we find evidence that there were civilizations that are older than what we think. Like we tend to think that civilization began about 5,000-6,000 years ago, and then sometimes we find things that suggest that maybe the universe was, or civilization, there were earlier civilizations before that. So it makes you wonder, like, what year is it really? Some people like to say that it's not actually 2021, that we should add 10,000 years and say that it's 12,021. So because since the earliest evidence that we have of civilization that we found goes back about 12,000 years. So there is this movement. I don't know how strong this movement is, but you can look it up, of people that want to change our year, the way we keep track of time. Right now we say it's 2021, but why do we're basing that off of basically Jesus? Like, why? Most of the world's not religious, I should say not Christian, and there's no reason for the world to track time according to that. So there are some people in the scientific community and otherwise that are saying we should keep track of years based on the earliest start of civilization, the earliest evidence of civilization, which is about 12,000 years. And I bring this up because I mentioned there's a couple of opinions onto which Shemitah we're in. So there's one opinion that we're in the 7th, and there's another that we're in the 2nd, that we're only in the 2nd Shemitah. So there were 7,000 years. There was one 7,000 year cycle before us, and now we're in the 2nd cycle. And there's a lot of things, like a lot of interesting ideas that come out of that. What does that mean to be in the 2nd cycle? And maybe we can talk about that afterwards. The implications of what does it mean to be in the 1st cycle of civilization versus in the 2nd cycle of civilization, and how does the Torah change? Because the Torah again is eternal. So how is the Torah understood in each cycle? So just an interesting idea to present to you, that if we are in the 2nd cycle, like some of our sages said, then we're really not in 5781, but we're in 12,781. Based on the Torah, based on those sages that say we're in the 2nd cycle, we're in 12,781, and that fits very closely to what many scientists would like to see, which is that we should change our years to 12,021, that we should be counting this, the current year should be 12,000. And that fits with this idea of being in the 2nd Shemitah. So just an idea. It's a little more out there. It's interesting. We have some evidence to support very early civilizations, the earliest civilizations being 12,000 years ago. The Sphinx, which sits in front of the pyramids, is even more mysterious, perhaps, than the pyramids, because the Sphinx appears to be even older. We have no idea when it was built. It looks like it's been eroded by flowing water, and it has so many layers that some people, not accepted by mainstream science because it's so bizarre, but some people think that this thing is at least 10,000 years old, maybe 12,000 years old. And the Sphinx is in the shape of a lion, of course. And so there's this idea that the Sphinx was built during the age of Leo. So remember we talked about these cosmic ages of this 26,000 year cycle. So the past 2,000 years were the age of Pisces. And before that was the age of Aries, 2,000 years before that. And if you keep going back, at that time, 10 to 12,000 years ago or so, that would have been the age of Leo. So the idea is that the pyramids and the Sphinx were built at this time, aligned with Orion, and the Sphinx was supposed to represent the age of Leo at that time. And I think this goes back to the idea of the cosmic Shemittot. So I want to talk about this because we're talking about a 26,000 year cycle. So that again brings to mind the question of how do we deal with that and the fact that the Jewish year is 5781. So we already addressed that when we talked about Torah and science in part 1 there, how we deal with time. But I want to talk about the cosmic Shemittot again. Remember this idea of a Shemitah, that we have a sabbatical year, right? The Torah tells us that every 7th year, we have a year of Shabbat, right? Every 7th day, we have a Sabbath day, and every 7th year, we have a Sabbath year. And in Kabbalistic texts that go back thousands of years, some of the earliest Kabbalistic texts, like Sefer Tmuna, there's this idea of even greater cosmic Shemittot, that there's a 7,000 year cycle of civilization, and that God kind of restarts civilization every 7,000 years. So we're in the year 5781, but we're not the first Shemitah necessarily. And so according to different texts, we might be in the second Shemitah, or perhaps in the 5th, maybe in the 7th even. But there were other 7,000 year cycles of human civilization that come and go. And I think the evidence suggests that we are in the second Shemitah. I think the consensus is that among most of the sources is that we're in the second Shemitah, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan talks about this more if you want to read his books, like his book Kabbalah and the Age of the Universe. He talks about this. I think he also talks about this in the Sefer Yetzirah book, if I'm not mistaken. So the idea that we're in the second Shemitah fits really neatly with this, because archaeologists, when they dig and they find stuff, we haven't found any evidence of complex civilization before 12,000 years ago. So the earliest pieces of evidence for any kind of like building cities, towns, villages, technology, perhaps the Sphinx, they don't go back more than 12,000 years. Before that, we might have some cave paintings or whatever, but no complex civilization. So it looks like civilization goes back to perhaps up to 12,000 years. So if we were in the second Shemitah, that fits perfectly, because you had 7,000 years, and now we're in 5781 of the second Shemitah. So that makes it really like 12,781, which just fits with the archaeological record really nicely. And the Midrash says, by the way, that before God created this world, it's a very famous Midrash, that God was creating and destroying other worlds before this one. And some say that's the secret of Bereshit, that in the beginning of the Torah, what does it say? V'ha'aretz ayta tohu vavo, right? V'choshech al pnei tehom, v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. That the Torah says that the world was chaotic, tohu vavo, that there was darkness upon the deep, that there was water. So some of the commentaries say, wait, that implies that something already existed, that there was already something. So there was previous worlds that were destroyed, and then out of the chaos of other old civilizations, God created a new thing. God hit reset and started again. It's a wild kind of idea that's hard to think about. It's not something that you hear about very often, very deep mystical secret, but I think it explains a lot of things. And I'll add just one more detail here. The reason that I like the opinion that we're in the second Shemitah is because each Shemitah has its quality, corresponding to the Kabbalistic Sfirot that we talked about. So the first Sfirah is Chesed, the second is Gevura, if you remember, then Tiferet. So if we're in the second Shemitah, those opinions that say we're in the second Shemitah, they say we're in the Shemitah of Gevura. Gevura is Din. And so the Torah is the same. The Torah is eternal. But in each Shemitah, the Torah would be expressed differently, But it's the same Torah, the same eternal Torah, but expressed differently in each cycle. So because we're in the second cycle, in the cycle of Din and Gvura, the Torah expresses itself in terms of Din and Gvura. And Din is judgment, Din is law, Din is ritual, right? So in our iteration of the Torah now, Judaism is very heavily focused on halacha, right? On law and ritual. And so the Kabbalistic explanation for that is because in this Shemitah, that's the focus. That's how the Torah is rectified and expressed in this current Shemitah, because we're in the Shemitah corresponding to Gvura and Din. So it's the realm of Allah. So the way that Judaism is in this cycle is very Allahic. And perhaps in previous cycles, maybe it was different. Maybe in the first Shemitah, the Torah was expressed more in Chesed. In the next one, it'll be more in Tiferet, whatever that means. So that's also part of it. So I think this idea of cosmic Shemittot it's actually a legitimate Jewish idea. It's not some like far out like New Age theory. It's something that's been discussed hundreds of years ago by our own sages in Sefer Tmuna, by Rabbi Yitzchak Manako, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan did a whole detailed analysis of this. It's discussed in many places, and it just fits well with the astrology and cosmology and archaeology and science. It all just works together really beautifully. So that's why I wanted to mention it.